Andy Austin here in the attic where my neighbours are currently redoing their roof, so you can hear the soaring noises in the background, for which I do apologise, but there's not a lot I can do. Perhaps they're also converting their attic to a little film place like this one. Next chapter from the Rainbow Machine, Tales from a Neurolinguist Journal by Andrew T. Austin. Now, this is the Hysterical Paralysis chapter. In this chapter, which is probably the longest, now I'm looking at it, I know I said the other chapter was the longest, this is longer. It's a winner on 5.5 pages. This is the differential between conversion syndrome, things like a stress rash, psychosomatic expression of a psychological stressor, which can go everywhere from a stress rash to a full-on hysterical paralysis, and everywhere in between. And people who are just blatantly faking it. It's the blatantly faking it component that I want to focus on for this video, because I think this is one of those conditions, one of these behaviours that is so widely unknown by so many therapists and healthcare workers, despite its prevalence in all cultures and societies globally. And when I worked at the hospital, this became very quickly an area of not really expertise, but preference. When we had someone in who was found to be, or thought to be, faking it, it was always a case of give them to Andy, because Andy likes that sort of weird thing, because Andy's weird. So I got to see a lot, especially in accident and emergency departments that I worked in. I got to see an awful lot of munchausens and factitious disorder patients who were presenting themselves to the department. And there was a lot of them. That was the bit. My estimate is that at any one time in just one hospital department, there was one patient who was there as a regular attender. So they were the ones we would know because of the frequency by which they attend. By frequency, we're talking daily, sometimes a couple of times a day, but on average they'd be in 2 or 3 times a week, generally. We had about 800 of those. That's quite a lot of people. So at any one time, we would have one of these people in the department. And because of their behaviours, they would also be quite labour-intensive and quite demanding of attention. One of the things they would do would be things like, I've swallowed a razor blade. Of course they haven't. Yet every once in a while, they would. Just to keep everyone on their toes. So we knew they'd be faking. They might say they've injected themselves with something noxious or toxic. Most of the time they haven't. But once in a while they would, because that way they can ensure that all the staff are on their toes and giving them maximum attention. Asthma and epilepsy were 2 of the most common things that people faked, and then all the weird esoteric neurological stuff, which of course is very hard to disprove, and especially if they're well educated, and these days with the internet people can educate themselves on these conditions, and they're much better at faking the syndromes. There was a lot of them. Some slipped through the system, and there was a couple of examples I gave in this chapter where we obviously didn't know that they were faking it. And it was only when we had a member of staff identify that patient from elsewhere, they think, oh, and then the patient disappears. Sometimes in the early stages, they take flight when there's a risk of exposure. But our regulars that we had in the accident departments, they were shameless. They simply didn't care. They just knew they had the upper hand because we had to treat them. One guy we had, he was hepatitis A and C. I don't even have both, maybe B and C. But he had 2 versions of hepatitis and HIV. He was an intravenous drug user and munchausens. And one of the things he would do is deliberately dislocate his shoulder and then swagger into the department, usually high and drunk, demanding treatment, and if he didn't get what he wanted, he'd bite on his lip and spit at people in the waiting room. We used to have to put up with that behaviour on a regular basis. Now, what do you do with him? Call the police? Well, he's got a dislocated shoulder. He's got rights and entitlements. We would have to attend him. And so he actually died whilst I worked in that department. He succumbed to the infections he was carrying. And I don't think anyone was too upset when he did pass on. I know that's an awful thing to say, but that's the reality. I kind of got a bit fed up with being spat on by this guy, as did everybody else. So he was a more overt. He's got a reason to be doing what he's doing. He's trying to get the drugs, and he wants the attention. The munchausens and factitious, the real munchausens patients, What do they want? They don't really want anything. There's no outcome that they're looking for. It's like stalkers. They don't want an outcome. They enjoy the activity of stalking. Stalking itself is the outcome. And for munchausens and factitious patients, that attention-seeking behavior is the outcome that they want. And so anything that risks bringing it to closure, as in, what do you want? Let's bring this to a conclusion, they'll take flight. And so it's all about the attention-seeking. Now, after I finished working at the hospital, and then the internet was becoming much, much bigger, more information starts to coalesce around these syndromes. And then I learned, other people knew this long before I did, the military fakers. So this is the old stolen valor. And there's an epidemic in the Western world, and it is predominantly a Western world phenomena, but it does happen elsewhere, of people pretending to be soldiers. They turn up at memorial parades. They turn up at the charities that work with veterans. They're often that homeless veteran that the local paper puts on the front page. We had one, not here, but where I used to live. And as soon as I saw that front page, the disgrace, we're letting down our veterans, and the standard narrative that goes with a homeless veteran on the streets, I knew immediately, because I knew him, and he was not a veteran. He never been in the army. But the journalists don't bother to check. And of course, they run that story, thus bringing even more attention to the guy. All the people in the know who know he's faking it, bound by confidentiality. No one's allowed to say nothing. And of course, that's how these people get away with it. They bind everyone up in confidentiality clauses by the nature of the presentation. Now, the military guys, of course, there's a thing where they're faking their military career. They may wax lyrical about their exploits in overseas wars, but often they get exposed by other soldiers because they can spot incongruencies in the uniform or the presentation of them. They can tell the fakers quite well. Members of the public like myself wouldn't have a clue, not a clue. If you have a look on YouTube, just type in stolen valor, you'll see just how many of these guys are getting outed and caught. There's a number of groups on Facebook as well, of which I've contributed to, because I went to school with one of Britain's top fakers. If there's such a thing, of a top stolen valor faker, I went to school with him. He wasn't in my year, his brother was. And it's just horrendous. This guy has been faking being in the military his entire life. And it's not just the military, he's been a submariner, he's been in the Navy, he's been in the Marines, he's done the whole lot. But what's interesting about him is he's very entertaining with it. He's quite a charismatic chap, utterly delusional or utterly narcissistic. Not quite sure which way that would go. And then that brings me to the crux of where I'm going with this. Therapists. There are loads of people, the social media especially, has enabled another avenue of these fakers to find a niche. And to be a coach, a life coach, a therapist, is a great niche for some of these people because there's no objective check or test. I mean, for all anyone knows, I could be faking it. Maybe I am. After all, what qualifications do I have? None. Sure, I've got lots of certifications. I've turned up on lots of courses. I'm a known figure. I've published and produced material. Could still be a faker. Because they're not all completely useless in terms of the presentation of self. And presentation of, they learn the subject, they can present it. So you'll find within the therapy world, especially in the life coaching, a lot of these people. Now, I won't tell you who this is. I won't reveal the gender. There is a person that a lot of the people on my network of people also know, who will believe that this individual is actually quite qualified and quite decorated in terms of their achievements. I know 100% this person is faking it. This person is little more than the Munchausens. I know they're Munchausens because I know them. I know them from before. But I'm bound by confidentiality, so I can't tell you. And I know there's other people out there like myself who also know this person is faking it. There's a little network of us. They can't say anything either. They're bound by confidentiality. So it's a great place to hide, and it's also a great place to put yourself on display in order to get the attention and play the game. All you've got to be is a life coach. Do they see clients? Some of them do. Some of them do. Do we know, how can we measure who these fakers are? You can't. Just like the neurological patients that I used to see at the hospital, they fit into that weird kind of area of, okay, so do they have a condition? Is it psychiatric, which is manifesting through this imaginary disorder that they don't have? Is that any different to any psychotic with a delusion? So it's a grey area of where is an overt faker who requires legal sanction and punishment, and where do we draw the line between that and they require care and support and treatment. But of course they never get the care, support and treatment that they actually need because they're presenting themselves elsewhere. Plenty of psychiatric patients in the psychiatric unit will tell you they're there because they're there monitoring the staff. They're there to do quality control. They're there under covert operations. Some will even tell you they're staff. And the old joke that you can't tell the difference between the member of staff and some of the patients is sometimes true. But it's also very true for life coaches and practitioners of all the alphabet therapies.